Now, hello, it's Mark Littlewood from the Business of Software, and this is one in a series of fabulous hangouts we've been having with previous Business of Software speakers. Today I am joined by Vince Darley from King Games. He's the chief scientist there. He gave a fantastic talk at Business of Software Europe last year on how you can use big data and data in your business to make more intelligent decisions. So without any further ado, let me introduce Vince.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here. I'm really looking forward to hearing what kind of questions everyone's got out there.
Well, first of all, the first question is, this is almost inevitable with Google Hangouts. It seems to hang sometimes. Has it started, or is it just not working for me personally? Dave Collins, I think it's not working for you personally, but try refreshing your screen. That usually does the trick. Vince, tell us about what you do at King Games, and also catch us up on what's been happening.
So obviously at King Games we make games, mostly for mobile devices these days, so all of those wonderful phones and tablets that everyone has. And we're in the fortunate position of making some of the world's most popular games. So, you know, Candy Crush Saga is one of ours. The sister titles to Candy Crush Soda Saga and Jelly Saga, and a whole host of others. In London here at one of our studios, Farm Heroes Saga is a great game that's also in you know, the top ends of the grossing charts worldwide. And there's a lot of great new game development going on across the business as well. So that's what we're all about. And you know, my particular role in things is part of the part of the business that looks at the data coming from our games and tries to understand how we can make them even better, even more fun, get players to play them for months and years on end, and you know, just keep enjoying them. So that's what we try to do. It's much harder than it may sound.
I tried to do my homework, Vince.
That's pretty good. You're at the end of the game there.
I am at the end of the game, but it keeps changing the rules. It keeps bringing more stuff back. So that was there this morning, and then came back at lunchtime. I've got more levels to do, but
indeed. Yes.
I hesitate to download any of the others, although I'm frequently invited to do so when I'm playing. But I have to say, it's one of my not so secret and well, certainly not so secret, but maybe guilty pleasures. It's a great way to just kind of spend a little bit of time when you could be otherwise on Twitter or whatever. So you joined King, and there were no data scientists and no data analysts there. Was that the case?
Well, there was almost no one. So I joined just under 4 years ago, and when I joined, I think there was no one with the job title of data scientist, but there were perhaps 2 people who you might call data scientists, and there was 1 person who was a data engineer, and there were 2 people who were doing some sort of BI reporting. And that was it for the whole of King. And I joined to kind of build that group up. And so, you know, very quickly by the end of that first year, we were probably 25 people. And it's grown a long way since then. And you know, today I would say it's somewhere between, you know, obviously there's much more specialism within things now, but there's you know, there's probably between 100 and 150 people across King who are in one way or another a sort of data focused person. And many of them, probably half of those, are data scientists, but there's loads of data engineers, there's lots of kind of business minded analytical people. There's, you know, a handful of your sort of psychologists and behavioral economists amongst them. You know, lots of different people whose sort of minds are coming together to try and understand what the data is telling us about our games and our players and what they love and what they hate. And it's amazing what you can learn.
And do you have a mission internally? Is there I mean, not so much at King, but within the data science team, is there some mantra that you all live by, or are people focused in the same way?
We, you know, as data scientists at King, we want to be great scientists in the world of in our world. So, a scientist is someone, a physicist is someone who's a great scientist in the world of nature and particles and all that kind of stuff. We aim to be great scientists in the world of games and players. And so, understanding them, understanding how that works, how people behave in those games, what they enjoy, what they hate, what makes them stick with the games forever, what makes them leave, understanding that world. So that's, being a great scientist is about running great experiments. It's about really understanding the subject. It's, and of course, in our world, we're in the lucky position where we can actually modify those games. We're not fixed by the laws of nature, which are fixed and unchanging. We actually can change things, and so there's some great advantages there.
Fantastic. Do you tie? No, I think you're on an echo. Are you on a speaker there? I can plug in if it's going to make things. I don't know. I'm just speaking, but no, it seems to have gone. I think it's just more joy of Google. This is still the best place I know to do Hangouts, and people suggest somewhere new every other week, and nothing seems to work. So how many of your experiments are actually on the pure data, or are you involved in kind of tying gaming personas and actual observation of people playing the games into the data that you're looking at? Where does the line finish? Where's the line drawn?
So by observations of the people, you mean
just watching them?
Watching them. So certainly we as a business do a fair amount of that, and there's obviously some stuff you can only get from a focus group, from really talking to people, getting them to play your game and asking them, what they liked, what they didn't, what they, particularly you can understand very quickly what they did and didn't understand. And that comes through very, very clearly. In the data, some of those things are a bit harder to spot. We can spot when there's people who don't understand what's going on, and they tend to show up in the data, for example, as people who have lost all of their lives on the first level of the game. Which is sort of incomprehensible to the game developer. The game, how can you possibly do that? But there are people who do, and they've clearly not understood something, and then the question is sort of why and what, but that's again very hard to get from the data. So you need to use both perspectives.
Okay. There's a great question from Sophia, who's a regular attendee and question thrower. This is, have you come across data which gave you ideas which you hadn't even thought about?
Hello?
Hello?
Oh, we're back again, it seems. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Have you come across data which gave you ideas which you hadn't even thought about?
Yes, I mean, a simple example is actually that one I just gave, where, we look at the players' first experience of the game, those first few days of playing, and we look at, well, where did they spend their time? How much time did they spend? Where did they lose their lives? And then, leaping out of that is there's this funny cluster of players here who are behaving in a way that we don't expect at all, and they've lost all 5 of their lives on the first level of the game. Something really strange going on there. So,
how could you do that?
Well, yes.
I mean, isn't the first level of the game designed to be foolproof?
Well, that's our goal. That's absolutely our goal, and clearly sometimes we fail. Maybe it's a different kind of game to that which the player's used to. We tend to all of our games today are sort of in the casual social sort of genre, so they're puzzle-like games. And aim to be very quick and easy to pick up. But even within that, there's quite a large variation. There's bubble shooters, there's the sort of match-3 switchers like Candy and Farm Heroes Saga. There's sliders and clickers. Pet Rescue Saga is a fantastic clicker. And so people who come from one of those game types to another one can easily get quite confused because they're busy trying to swap candies, and this game, no, you need to click them. So I think it can be things like that. It's just a game that they've never experienced before. And we have an extraordinary large player network built up over the last few years. So there's certainly all kinds and sorts of people within it. So we really have to try very hard to make sure the games are understandable.
While you were answering that question, somebody asked, James McClave asked, has AI helped you in your mission? Will it help more in the future? And I suddenly had this vision of Deep Mind being set to play Candy Crush, and maybe that's why it's failing those first few times. How has AI affected what you've been doing? Have you been watching what's been going on in that area with?
Certainly been watching what's been going on in that area, and it's amazing what DeepMind have done with AlphaGo there, and that's a real sort of revolution. And so there's so many of us here internally who are very interested in that area and keeping abreast of it. So far, the use of AI at King has been mostly limited to sort of just testing the games. So many of the game teams have their own very simple, on a scale of 0 to AlphaGo of 1,000, we're operating sort of below 1, I would say. There, it's we're very, very primitive in what we do. We use it mostly for testing and QA purposes. However, there are discussions about whether we should try and build more sophisticated things there, and it would certainly be beneficial to us to have a greater understanding of from an AI system of how difficult certain levels are, which ones require players to learn some special trick and which ones don't. One of the things that we've discovered is fun is the idea that within a single level of a game is that when you first play that level, you don't necessarily realize quite what the right way is. What's the strategy for this level? And as you play it, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, you gradually work out what it is you need to do to get through that level. And you can see that very clearly in the data, that your chances of success at that level start off low and go up quite steeply as you make those first 5 or so attempts. And then somewhere around that range of 5 attempts, that chance of success plateaus. And it's like, okay, I've learned the knack. But that learning slope is something that's really fun. People like to learn. They like to feel like they're gaining some mastery. And so, if you can design more levels in your games which have a nice steep learning curve that people are enjoying, as long as it's not too steep, you don't want people to feel that they can't get through at all, then that's something that makes the game really fun.
Interesting. So leading on from that, actually, this is a great question from David Rajan. I'd love to understand how you operationally connect the work the data scientists do to uncover insight with product developers who are applying that insight to change or create new games. How do they link and work together? And one of the things I've noticed playing Candy Crush is, as you say, there are very clear strategies to win certain levels. Do you consciously decide to set a series of levels with strategy A, strategy B, strategy C, and cycle them over, or how do you feed your insights back to your product team?
Yeah, so that's it's a really interesting question. So mostly, I would say the data scientists are actually working within that product team. So within the game team, within the game studio, there's a team of data scientists who work very, very closely with those product developers, game designers, level designers. So it's much more of a kind of collaborative work than some scientist in a lab somewhere produces an insight which then needs to be carried over to someone else. It's a much more collaborative thing. And certainly as far as the sort of ongoing evolution and development of the live games, that's very much how it is. And so we've got data science teams embedded across every game studio at King. And then sort of, so how do one of the things that we've discovered is very important is to have this sort of diversity within the game. So this sort of, having certain levels where you need certain kinds of strategies and so on, those are very much things that we've learned over time, and I think have really become embedded across the business. So all of our game and level designers very much understand that when they're designing the next episode group of 15 levels, that they need to make sure that there's a diversity within that but also a kind of often kind of theme. So maybe many of the levels within the episode will be of a certain character, but then there'll be a few within there that are slightly different. All of our games have several different modes, so you don't want to spend too long doing the same thing. You need a bit of a diversion. So 3 levels of this kind, switch over to something else. And we obviously will look very closely at the data every time we release a new episode to see whether there's anything problematic there. Are there levels that somehow are weird? There's dozens of metrics that we look at on our levels, and things can stand out very, very quickly, and then we'll work to fix those extremely fast. And sometimes we'll turn around a fix in the same day if a level is very clearly broken.
Okay, fantastic. Couple of questions around big data, small data. One, when does data stop and big data start? And this is, it's like, I don't know, it's the philosopher's equivalent of why, I think. And the second one, which I think is maybe more relevant, and I'd like to talk about the kind of scale that you're doing things later on, but how applicable is what you're doing at a massive scale relevant to a small organization?
So yeah, big data, small data, we're in the privileged position of having loads of data, but frankly, I think what's more important is is that bit that maybe we started with about being a scientist about the players. Data sometimes gets in the way. You've got loads of data, you want to dive into it and dig deep and understand what's going on, and you want to step back from that and just think about what's my hypothesis here as a scientist? What's the question I'm trying to answer? What do I think my players are doing and why? And once you've got that clear, and you understand what the relevance of that is to the business, who's going to make some different decision as a result of this, then you dive into the data, the right data, and that may not need to be that large. So I think it's, there's definitely dangers from having loads of data, is that you spend way too much time just sort of aimlessly wandering without really thinking what you're doing. Now, obviously, there's benefits from having large amounts of data, and certainly at King, we see, we can understand it with very fine degree of detail, the relationship between, all the metrics of importance, and understand much more detail what causes players to churn out of a game and stop playing it. Understand what kind of cycles of difficulty players enjoy. So we can certainly understand that in far more detail. And we're slightly more immune to the sort of noise. Obviously, in all this sort of world of games and anything with humans in the loop, frankly, people are unpredictable. That's very, very clear. And so there's tremendous noise. You run an experiment comparing this group with that group, and you're going to see a huge amount of noise in that. So obviously, having more data to some extent damps down that noise. And so that makes it easier for you to draw quicker conclusions. And so in that sense, Kings are in a slightly beneficial position when we're running experiments on a huge game like Candy or Farm Heroes or so on. But equally, we have lots of games that are earlier in their stages, games that are, in their sort of soft launch phase and so on. And there they have just as few players as anyone else. And we still run experiments. We still try and understand what's going on there. So I think it's very, very relevant to companies of all sizes that if you're, there's data-driven experimentation is absolutely essential, but it needs to be done in the right way. It can be done horrifically as well, and you can learn nothing from poorly designed experiments. So,
fantastic. And look, through you seem to be answering Sophia's question there about how you get the balance of updating a game depending on the data you receive. Do you change the large-scale games more rapidly than the small-scale games, or is it in fact the other way around?
It's actually quite balanced, I would say, because a large-scale game obviously has a larger team around it, so there's more scope in some sense for changing it. However, there's a lot more kind of business as usual stuff going on, and sort of issues to fix and so on. So it's surprisingly balanced. And then I suppose the other point is that a game very early in its life cycle the entire game team is working to improve, and they're working on experiments and new things to improve that game, because that's the only thing that they've got there to do. Whereas once a game is a little bit more mature, you've then got many people who need to work on adding new levels, new features, new content, all of that stuff that keeps the game fun for years on end, but is not really, in some sense, that's the business as usual. You need to have fantastic new content, new levels. They can't be the same as the old. You need new features within that. And so a lot of the team is doing that, and now you've got way fewer who are actually working on improving and experimenting and so on. So there's quite a sort of cycle, but all in all, I would say it balances out quite evenly. Interesting.
Do the data scientists ever come up with the concept for a game?
Certainly some of them do. So like most game companies, we hold game jams internally. So those are sort of usually a sort of 1 or 2 day event where anyone in the company can participate, and it's about coming up with new game concept, building some quick prototype, working together, a developer, an artist, a graphic designer, data scientist, whoever, and amazing stuff gets built in no time at all. It's really astonishing that what a talented group of people can do in no time. And so, yeah, certainly data scientists do get involved in that. Not perhaps quite as often as an artist or a game developer, but certainly many of the team do. And I would love if even more of them did, frankly, because I think it's the more you can understand that world, the better all of us can be at doing our jobs well.
Interesting. And who are the kings and queens at King? Who are the clearly the data scientists are people that can provide huge input into the long-term profitability of a business, of a game. But the creatives have to create something. The designers have to design, and the games makers have to make. Who are the sort of? Is there a hierarchy of?
I wouldn't say a hierarchy. I mean, King's a very non-hierarchical company across the board. So there's certainly no hierarchy. I mean, there's a like from game jams and other sorts of processes like that, new ideas come out. There's a sort of mixed variety of more experienced people who will give feedback on those, and ultimately, of course, there's a fairly formal process of taking a game from idea to prototype development to to full development, to various stages of playtest and launch. And as with all companies in the games industry, we aim to kill many games along that path, because most of them will not turn out to be good enough. There may have been a fantastic idea, but actually just couldn't get it to work right, and you're better off stopping that and moving on to the next idea. So there's a huge funnel leading down to a small number of extremely high quality games that the world at large eventually sees.
Okay. Really interesting. And here's another, I mean, this again relates to this. I'm going to pick on level 65 in Candy Crush as the example. How often do you go back into previous levels and change them in the same way that an e-commerce person would optimize a landing page? Or is that something you're happy to do? I mean, I guess it doesn't make any difference to the people that have used it. But I mean, level 65, so I think it's a fascinating example.
Yeah, so the answer is well, fairly often, but let me characterize what I mean by that. So, Candy Crush level 65, for example, we've probably made that easier about 5 times in the last 3 or 4 years. And the reason that we've done that is because well, sometimes we learn that a level is just, we've understood more and more over time about what makes a good level versus a bad level. And so, we analyzed that one day and realized, oh gosh, this is horrific. This is, just frustrating millions of players, and we're losing them. We need to fix it. So, it's a problem that needs fixing. So, we see those problems every now and again on levels in our games. And as we've learned more, we sometimes understand that there are new kinds of problems that we didn't know about before. So there may be new things we need to fix. Not so often, but sometimes. But then in general, there's what happens with any industry, and games is no different, is that we have a life cycle of the players coming through the games. So we've got the early adopters who are the super keen gamers, who will be the first ones who installed, Candy Crush when it first came out. And now, 3.5 years later, the people who are installing Candy Crush Saga today are not, on average, not as keen gamers. They're not going to want as challenging an experience in the game. And so for that reason, you need every now and again to be returning to, in this particular case, to things that are particularly challenging or difficult, and making them easier, because that's just what the kinds of people you've got coming into the game today, that's the experience that they're looking for. And otherwise they would just drop out of the game within the first sort of 50 or 100 levels. When they hit level 65 or whatever, they'd be, I'm never going to get through this, no point me continuing. So that's it's a fairly regular thing. And so obviously internally we have lots and lots of metrics and dashboards measuring the levels, and so our game teams will look carefully at those every few months and just sort of see, is there anything that looks a bit out of whack, any levels where somehow we're losing crazy numbers of people for no good reason, and they'll then tweak those things. So it's it's not something we do every day, but it's something that we look at on a regular basis in the life cycle of these games. And frankly, it's amazing the life cycle that these games do have, where as you showed on your phone earlier, you've got to the end of Candy Crush there. That's taken a very long amount of dedication, so thank you very much for that. But our games, we want them to be those sorts of games that people are happy to spend years playing.
I would like to say that it's not just my effort on Candy Crush. I think my children have completed at least 3 or 4 of the levels. I quite often come back and find my phone is there and they've just been bashing away. But I'm trying to stop them. It's a great fun game. Do you ever make levels harder? So level 666, for example, is one where you just basically get infinite colors. So if you need to go and collect colors or something, you can just do it. And I used to, when I was kind of beyond that, and you had those little challenges to get the free rewards, and I'd finish the levels I was doing, I would go back to 666 because I knew I could get 10,000 green candies or something and get extra lives and blah, blah, blah. And it seemed like a bit of a cheat, to be honest. But do you keep them? So do you ever make them harder just because you're losing money because potentially someone will go off and buy a booster or whatever it is?
I would say never for that reason, really. The money is driven much more by players' fun of the games than by putting some crazy hurdle in front of them. And those are the sort of things where we've learned a lot over the years. So yeah, I'm sure occasionally we go back and make a level harder, probably for some other reason, that there's some sort of problem with the level that we've seen, or just that region of the game. There's maybe a period of 15 or 20 levels where there isn't anything particularly challenging, and that we tend to want to avoid that. Our players really want to have an occasional challenge, and so if there's too many levels in a row that you whisk through, then that's a slightly boring period of the game. So we would then go back and make something a bit harder. I'd say that's probably the most likely reason I can think of.
Okay, that makes sense. This is a great question, not just because it's something that I think people will be interested in, but I think it also gives people an insight into some of the other things that you've done with data. So in what way is the game market unique, and in what ways is it just like a standard product?
It's an interesting one. So in one sense, games are obviously fairly unique in that they don't have a functional purpose. I'm not doing my shopping through Candy Crush Saga, or checking on my bank statement or whatever. So there's clearly no function there that is. But on the other hand, games are there for fun and entertainment, and in that sense, there's lots of things which are fun and entertaining. I can be watching movies. I can be, as you mentioned earlier, just messing about on Twitter, seeing what people are tweeting about. There's lots of ways you can pass your time, and our games are sort of something that's a bit more interactive, a little bit more stimulating, that you need to think a bit obviously whenever there's a challenge. So they're in many ways unique, but in many ways equally another product. But I guess what's most unique about them is that there's no strong reason for someone to play your game, so they must like it. So your only hope is to make a game that is sufficiently fun that someone wants to spend their time on it, and that's so that's a great challenge. But with, as you mentioned, my sort of past history, I worked in the grocery industry before, and obviously people do need to buy food. So there's a limited number of outlets you've got there, and you know that. If you can get someone to buy food through you, it's extremely likely they're going to come back and buy more food through you in the future. With games, obviously, it's a little bit trickier. The barriers to entry and exit are much lower. You can download me playing a new game on the App Store in a matter of seconds or minutes, depending on your connection speed. So you've really got to make something that is fantastic.
Just before anyone gets the impression that Vince was in the retail industry on a checkout till, you were running data and analytics for one of the big, I can say this isn't the BBC, it was Ocado. So you were looking at all of their online delivery and logistics data. Is that the...
Yes, well, all the delivery, logistics, all the warehousing, the web store, all of that sort of stuff. And there's enormous similarities really in that you really want to understand the customers. One of the most interesting things that came out of that I've seen across both of those is this notion that you can easily get misled by looking at metrics that don't reflect your real customers. So with any website, you've got loads of people coming to your landing page. Many of whom are probably coming for the wrong reasons or coming just to check you out, who aren't really, they're never going to become a customer of yours. And those people can, in some sense, pollute your data.
We've just been having this conversation today about another project we've been working on, actually. So.
Yeah, so we see that in our games as well. So there are plenty of people who will install a game, play it for 1 minute, and disappear. Obviously some of those we might like to feel we could have got to play a bit longer, but clearly the majority of them were just not ever going to be a customer of that game. And so you need to be very careful looking at your data, not to let those kinds of things distract you and make you take a wrong decision. And you want to make all of your decisions based on metrics that reflect a slightly longer term interaction with the game, rather than one of just a couple of minutes or even just for a couple of days. That's still not really someone who you should put too much weight on those pieces of data.
Okay. If you're A/B testing, you're trying to optimize, and you're using data, is there a danger that you optimize your way to the top of a molehill and you've completely missed the mountain? How do you make sure you're not missing the mountain? And if you're getting 5-10% incremental increase in something, that all feels very good, but you may just be missing the point. Something you were alluding to earlier on.
Yeah, so you need to make sure that the kinds of experiments that you're doing is basically, you need to make sure you spread your bets. So some of our game teams do this in a very sort of rigorous way. Others do it much more informally. But basically, you need to be looking at sort of high risk, high reward stuff, medium risk, medium reward, and low risk, low reward stuff. Where the low risk, low reward is generally your small tweaking and optimizations which get you to the top of that molehill. And the high risk, high reward are the things that might take you to the whole new mountain next door. but obviously, more likely to fail. So really important to spread those bets. And we try really hard to do that, and it means you need to experiment with stuff that you believe will fail, but you equally believe it's got a small chance it might actually do something amazing. And that's a kind of mind shift that you need to get to, and it's very, very important. Else you really do get stuck on that molehill, like you described.
Do you celebrate failure?
We try to, yes. And certainly, in my team, we've actually been having some discussions recently around certain projects, and just even within a project, we've been saying, hey, here's this question that we want to answer. How can we find a way to actually, as quickly as possible, sort of fail on this project and prove that this question is a bad question, is the wrong question, or it's got a negative answer? And if we can fail on that with 2 weeks of work and put it to one side and move on to the next thing, that's actually a great thing. Because if we can get through those questions so fast, we will uncover some amazing stuff. So certainly try to do that. And obviously, that big pipeline I described earlier, where lots and lots of games get killed and so on, it's absolutely essential that you view those things as a positive learning experience and an opportunity to move on to the next thing, which will be even better.
Yeah. I read a report, and I'm always slightly dubious about the value of these things, but it was something along the lines of 0.19% of all the players of mobile games contribute to 48% of the revenue that those games make. Is that?
That sounds extreme, really extreme, from my perspective. Obviously there's a lot of different, we're not in the world of casino games and stuff like that. We're in the casual social games. So we aim to get a much broader swathe of revenues from across the player base. And certainly in our player base, around 2% of all of the players do spend some money in the game. So it's still a small percentage, but it's a much broader number there.
But 2% roughly spend money.
Yep.
Well, yeah, that probably means that's not necessarily massively out of whack. 0.2% spend almost half of it. I don't know. Interesting. Right, let's go to big data and tools, because I had a few questions that came in earlier on. Tell us about the tools you use on a daily basis.
So
this is your chance to show off about your nodes.
It's a lot of R and Python and the sort of coding languages that we in the data science community use here. Underneath those, all the data is sitting in some huge Hadoop and Exasol data warehouses, and is nicely organized in there for us to query the data from those. We've taken to using some wonderful tools. There's something called a Jupyter notebook that is a wonderful sort of a way of organizing your data querying, your analysis, your graphs, all of that stuff in one notebook online, and it's a great way to do data science work. So it's more interactive. You're not constantly switching between querying data over here, copying it over. Everything's in one place. You can share them with other people, and so I'd say that's a relatively new thing over the last couple of years. And I'd very much recommend, if anyone's not aware of Jupyter notebooks, they used to be called IPython notebooks because there was a historical tie to the Python language, that I'd really recommend to check them out. They've really helped us to work much more efficiently.
Cool. Is there a tool that you would like? Is there a tool that you want some aspiring startup or even grown-up company to come to you and say, hey?
Yeah, there's always things that we're interested in, but I suppose there's one area in particular where we've even run a couple of proof of concepts with some aspiring startups and slightly more grown-up companies. And so there's sort of, if you imagine the world, you've got all your data in this big data warehouse, and the way that you look at that data is sort of one of two ways. You can write some SQL to query it and get some stuff out, and that's a fairly time-consuming process. Even with the wonders of today's data warehouses, you know, that takes time. You write your query, you probably write it wrong the first time anyway, so you're drinking a lot of cups of coffee while you're eventually getting the answers you want. So that's one way. The other way is that you've got some standardized aggregations of that data and some front-end reporting tools, Tableau, ClickView, all of those sorts of things, MicroStrategy, which give you some standard view on some standard data. And so that's obviously a much nicer way to start. You dig in immediately, you can see some nice graphs and charts of your business metrics. However, neither of those is really great. The sort of Tableau ClickView approach, you start diving in because you've got some hypothesis in mind, and you dive 3 levels deep, and now you're stuck because you've reached the bottom of that report and you need to go deeper, and now you can't. You've got to now back out and start writing some SQL. And the SQL way isn't great because it's very, very time consuming for you to even get started. And so, you know, something in between that looks like Tableau or ClickView and is similarly responsive and nice and wonderful and flexible to use, but allows you, which requires aggregation. You know, you can't be responsive on 7 petabytes of data without having some aggregated stuff in the middle. But a tool that lets you dive inside that aggregation to the underlying data once you've drilled down far enough. And so that sort of flexibility to kind of bridge both worlds, the world of the raw data and the aggregated data in a sort of seamless way. So there's that's something we would love to have, and we've investigated a few possibilities out there. None of them have quite ticked all the boxes yet, but I'm hopeful that that over the next year or two something will. And I should say it's a problem that those, you know, it's a problem of having too much data. You know, if there may be those on this AMA who are used to using Tableau and just love it, and it works at the speed of light, they can investigate everything they want, and that's great. However, when you point Tableau at a table that contains 1 trillion rows of data, it doesn't behave like that. And that's the problem that you need some new bit of technology to solve. If the right thing comes along, that would be very, very helpful to many of us at King.
Do you build a lot of your own tools and resources internally?
We're gradually building more and more. I mean, with the underlying data infrastructure, the sort of our systems for doing A/B tests, doing experiments, we've built that ourselves. Some of the new sort of, as we've gained more insight, we've built some really wonderful new dashboards and things internally, which are great. And in fact, there's a great tool called Plotly that we use as a way to build nice interactive charts that you can easily share and so on. So quite a lot we build ourselves, and as a business, we've begun to open source a few things here and there as well. We feel that would be useful. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of building, but you know, equally in some areas you don't want to be reinventing the wheel. So and particularly in the world of big data, it's going to be very expensive reinventing some of those wheels. So.
Okay, I'm going to pick on Robert Stevens here. I think he obviously works for BuzzFeed. What are your big 5 rules for looking after data? Can you make number 4 make our jaws drop? I just added that. What are your big rules? There may not be 5, but
big 5 rules. So let's have a think. So first of all, make sure you're capturing the right data. It's amazing how often we find that that the right data isn't being captured. You know, a new game feature is developed, and the tracking of the way in which players are interacting with that feature, we've not bothered to do that. So we are kind of running blind. I'm slightly exaggerating. It's not as bad as that, but you know, that can easily happen. So make sure you're actually tracking the right data. Also, I guess, you know, a big rule is, which kind of goes alongside that, is don't assume your data is right. Your data is definitely wrong unless you've done something to validate it. So, so that involves tracking even more data. Well, don't just track what you need to know to make your business decision. Track what you need to know so that you can be sure that that other data is correct. So, are the right people seeing this? Are they interacting with it? Did it take them to the right place? All of that sort of stuff. So those are definitely key. And then I suppose a third one would be organize. So that's if you do those two right, you've got this wonderful pool of data that you're gathering in some data warehouse system, whether it's on premise or in the cloud. So now you need to organize that, and that needs to be organized in a way that makes sense for your business, which is almost certainly not the way in which the data came in its sort of raw, unstructured, horrible fashion. So, reorganize, build a data model around that data that makes it make sense to your business and the decisions your business wants to make about your customers. So that's a sort of, and that's often quite hard. I would say, particularly in the mobile world, where the nature of a unique identifier is nowhere near as clean as it should be. So knowing the unique customer who happens to be playing your game is really hard, actually. So that's the rule number 3. Rule number 4 would be get some great people who can actually dig into that and ask, to technically great people who can actually answer all the right questions for you. However, question number 5 is make sure you're asking the right question. The rule number 5 is make sure you're asking the right questions. And it's all too often that the wrong questions are asked. And so, we really try and encourage the right dialogue between, say, there's the business, to be slightly sort of stereotypical about it, there's the business person asking, hey, tell me how many people we had yesterday. And there's the data scientist, and their job should be to have the right dialogue with the business person so that you end up with a good question being answered, not a rubbish one. And so that usually means the data scientist has to say, hey, why do you need to know that? What are you going to do about it? And you go back around that loop a few different times, and you eventually end up with something where the data scientist understands that the business person wants something really important and why they want it and what decision they're going to make. And the data scientist knows exactly how to get that really well to get the perfect support for that decision. And if you don't go around that loop, you end up with a demotivated data scientist producing some kind of unhelpful information, which the business person then realizes isn't actually what they wanted because they didn't explain it clearly enough, and they have to go back again. And you just go back and forth around that, everyone getting very annoyed and frustrated before you give up in horror. So
data scientists like engineers with MacBooks. I'm nervous we're running out of time. It's 10:02, and I know you have a hard stop at 6. So I really appreciate you taking the time. But there are a couple of things that I would like to pick up on. This is a question that's come on in a number of different ways, and there's 2 ways to answer it. So how do you train to be a data scientist? Can you recommend any courses? The flip side of that, I suppose, is data science is a relatively new thing. So how do you recruit people that can help you, support you?
So yeah, it's a hard question, actually. I mean, obviously there's tons of courses that call themselves data science courses and all of that, and it may be that King's sort of desires in this area are a little bit different to other people's. We don't really deal with textual analysis, for example. Our data is very much the data of people playing the games. So for us, all the sort of gee whiz, sort of machine learning, predictive analytics, super duper, in-depth knowledge of sort of data mining and so on. Yeah, that's all okay, but we would far prefer to have someone who was half as good at that stuff and really enjoyed thinking about our world, the world of the players and the games, and wanted to get inside the head of the player and understand them. And if someone doesn't have that, then it doesn't matter how fantastic they are at machine learning or something, they are not going to make a great data scientist, at least in our world at King. So yeah, to me, it's so, and that's, but then, you know, how to train as a data scientist. Well,
so I've just realised who that question came from. That's my daughter.
yeah.
She's logged in using my Gmail account. So okay, yeah.
I don't know quite how best to train people at that. We try and evaluate at least people's potential at doing that in our interview process. So, you know, it's easy to tick the technical boxes and, you know, are people good or not? Do they understand stats? All that kind of stuff, fairly easy to evaluate. But, you know, can they apply themselves to a business? Do they have the capability to learn how to do that well? That's something really important from which we try and evaluate through case studies and other things in the interview process. And I would say it's the biggest difference between someone who succeeds at being a great productive data scientist at King and someone who really struggles is that line. It's much easier to pick up technical skills than it is to pick up those sort of slightly softer skills, and they are just as valuable.
Just retrain the anthropologists with some computing skills. A couple of other questions that have come in that are, do the rules change from data to big data? Now this is Robert who asked the 5 rules. I would say those rules pretty much apply whatever size of data you're using, aren't they?
I would say so. I mean, obviously, you can get away with cutting more corners when you've got small data because the tools you use, the Tableau and everything. There's great tools which make it much easier and quicker to deal with inadequacies in those 5 rules when the data is small, and just when the data is big, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Vince, just before we sign off, there's a great question to leave you with to finish. But I want to say thank you very, very much. It was a pleasure having you last year at Business Software Europe. I now launch into a shameless plug for Business Software Europe. The 3rd event, which is in Dublin, May the 16th to the 17th, we have some equally fabulous speakers and the most amazing hotel I've ever stayed in. It's some sort of Irish money laundering operation as far as we can work out. We've got a 5-star hotel at a ridiculously cheap room night, and if we were down in the middle of Dublin it would be 600 euros a night or something. So that's coming up. We've got people like Rory Sutherland from Ogilvy, Rand Fishkin from Moz, Steli Efti from Closio, Bridget Harris from You Can Book Me, Eva Pascoe from the Retail Practice, and all sorts of other fantastic people. So go to businessofsoftware.eu or businessofsoftware.org if you want to come to our next conference in the States. We have a price break that runs out at the end of this month. So if you book by March the 31st, you'll save 500 euros plus VAT in Europe and $1,000, which is actually quite a lot of money, in the States. So go and check those out. And I'm going to leave you with this one, Vince. In your talk, you mentioned the thing you hadn't managed to nail down in the human feeling, you hadn't managed to nail down is the human feeling of fun. Have you got any closer? And this is quite important for your business, because if I look at these rules, and I've written them down, ask the right questions. Your business is about fun. Are you any closer?
That's a very distant target, but yeah, I think there are things that we've learned over the last year or so which have got us a little bit closer to that. So some of that we've learned just by analyzing the data more, and that sort of learning curve I described in the levels is one of those sorts of things. So that's, it's great that we understand that kind of thing a bit more. And there's other stuff we've learned from running experiments in the games. So we know a little bit better what kinds of things motivate players to come back and enjoy the game more, play, whether it's more times in the same day, more days in a week, or whatever. We understand some of the things that players look for in the games, and which motivate them in small ways. So we're a little bit closer, I would say, but it's a long journey. So plenty more of that to come.
Brilliant. Vince, it's always a complete pleasure, and I learn so much talking to you. You're such an enthusiast for data and fun and games, and for all the other things that you've done over the years as well. It's been a really special Ask Me Anything today, and I really want to say thank you also to such active question askers. We had a whole bunch of things that came in beforehand, and I tried to kind of distill it down to a few things that would make sense. But we've had some really great questions come in over the course of the thing. We'll put this up with some notes on the talk page in the next day or something, and let us know if there's anything that we can do for you. Maybe we should do one of these live in London or something, and invite some people around to the pub and talk about data as well. So we'll see. Watch this space. Great. Thanks, guys.
Great questions.